If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Sheryl Plouffe, who's turned her professional media experience into a thriving virtual video production agency and consultancy. She's an entrepreneur, international speaker, and has broadcast over 20,000 hours of live television over her 25-year career. Today, Sheryl creates and implements custom content plans for 6 to 7-figure business owners so that they can get their brand well-known online fast. She's the creator of Cash In on Camera, a live stream show and audio podcast dedicated to online business growth. Sheryl, what an absolute pleasure it is to welcome you to the show. And thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
It is my pleasure, Susan. I'm so glad to be here with you for this important topic. And it's something that I am passionate about and happy to share.
Fabulous. And I know a few weeks ago that you were kind enough to have me on your show. And that was a video podcast. This is an audio podcast. Which is better?
Well, it's not that one is really necessarily better than the other, but I will make a case for why I like video first. And a video first approach allows us to really have the best of both worlds. It's not that an audio only podcast is a bad thing. We have seen many, many successful people do great things with an audio only podcast, but I am biased somewhat. You know, I come from a video world, and I think especially in this post-pandemic world, in a place where we have seen how video has really come to the forefront and has helped business owners, authors, entrepreneurs, and experts to have a lifeline to keep their both life and business going through the pandemic. It was all through video. It was all through video conferencing that they were able to keep up with everything that was going on. So I think I've been certainly making this case for many, many years, but I'll make it again. I think that a video first approach is the best way to have the best of both worlds, because now you have the visual and the auditory modalities driving that content. It's just a way to be able to get seen and be known in different modalities and different platforms, which of course, you know, are more video friendly and video first.
I'm going to jump on what you're saying there because, yes, I know that you can do more with video, but talk to us about some of the different things that you can actually do with video versus just the audio.
Well, I think it's really just about how people like to consume content. You have people who gravitate more toward watching and seeing, and obviously through the video modality, you're able to communicate things in a different way by using hand gestures and nonverbal communication and express ideas in a different way, where you see, let's say, both people talking to each other, or it could even be that you're demonstrating something, or again, speaking with your hands and just facial expressions. And so all of these nonverbal cues come through on the video. And it's not to say that you can't achieve some level of that through voice and through an audio podcast, because obviously you can use inflection and you can use tonality and other things to be able to bring that forth. But a video, it just brings it to the forefront in a different way. And it allows people to have choices about how they consume your content.
So one of the things that concerns me about video is that you don't have the control of background and maybe even the microphone that they're using and even what your guests wear. So how do you sort of have some control over that? Because I believe that impacts what people see as well.
I think it depends on the brand that you're building. And if that's really important to you to have control over how your guests are appearing and what their backgrounds look like and things of that nature, one thing you could do is have and set up a pre-interview call on Zoom, for example, where you get an opportunity to see what the background is that they intend to use. But I would argue that people who are watching, let's say, a video podcast, since that's what we're talking about today, they're not necessarily as concerned with perfection as I think we might be as the hosts. They are looking for solutions to their problems. And I'll give you an example. The other day, I was going to a client's and I dressed in such a way that I was ready for video production. So I had a ball cap on, a sweater, and I got to my destination and I looked at my phone and realized, oh no, I am actually doing interviews today and I messed up my schedule. And here I am with a ball cap on and I am not about to take it off after having it on my head for 6 hours. I mean, it would have been awful. And I thought, okay, Sheryl, here's a really good example of how you have to let your sense of perfectionism, which I think we all suffer from, and your desire to want to control the situation, just let it go. People don't care that you have a ball cap on. What they care about is, am I going to get value from this interview that I'm about to spend 15 to 20 minutes listening to or watching? And the truth is they did. They did get value from those interviews. It didn't matter that I had a ball cap on. So sometimes I think we as the show hosts, if you are a podcaster now or you aspire to be a podcaster, you want to put your best foot forward, but it does not have to reach a level of perfection like it maybe did when I was an actual broadcaster on national television for, a media company whose role it was to control the narrative and whose role it was to control the look and the feel and the brand, because I was a broadcaster for their brand. When you are in control of your own show and you're the host, you control the brand. I think, yes, you could, if it was important to you, get on a call and go over those intricate details about what they're wearing and what the background looks like. I would be concerned a little bit more with the audio quality. I think that is certainly important, but I don't obsess over what the background looks like of my guest's office, for example. What I'm more concerned with is, can they bring value to my audience? And that's really what they care about.
That's fascinating because you're right. Yes, I can't control everything. And of course, what they're wearing and the background, we could make suggestions, but at the end of the day, you're quite right. It's really all about the solutions. Let's get into more of the nitty gritty of actually putting together a video podcast. What does it actually take? If one of our listeners wants to suddenly do a video podcast of their own, what's the bare essentials that they really need?
Well, it depends on if you want to do a video podcast that is recorded in advance or a video podcast that is live. I do the live version. And I also teach that live version. And there are some reasons why I do it that way, namely because it circumvents a lot of very tedious post-production. In other words, editing is a big part of that. And so I prefer to spend my time building my business, serving my clients on, income generating activities, one of which can be your podcast. But what often happens is that people get caught up in editing either themselves or hiring out editors who are going to edit, say, 4 or 5 hours of content every week to produce those interviews or to produce that talk show or that video podcast, when that effort, money, time, and energy could be better spent on income generating activities. So I'm less of a fan of pre-recording video podcasts and more of a fan of live streaming them, because now we're being really efficient with our time. What does it take? What are the bare bones? Well, if you're going to record, and we see this a lot, is somebody will use, say, a Zoom platform or a video conferencing platform and pre-record the interview and then edit that interview, download it, add bells and whistles to it if they want to, name banners, B-roll, graphics, music, any number of elements that you can add to a video podcast. And they can edit out certain sections if they choose to. But I'm more of a live type of girl. And that's a term that we often hear in the broadcasting world, which is where I come from. And live to tape, the concept is that you're going to record it as if it was live so that you don't have as much editing to do in the post-production. So bare bones, I would say a platform where you can record content. So I'm a big fan of multi-streaming and live. The platform, and I think you're going to share this with your audience, but I have a gift that includes this one tool that I use to do my show, and it's called Restream. It's a multi-streaming tool, and there are 8 other tools that I use in conjunction with that. But the live streaming aspect now allows me to still have avail to a recording. I can definitely access that after the fact, but I'm doing it live. And I'm adding, through the click of a mouse, I'm adding elements to the production of my show just with the click of a mouse. So now I'm saving myself a lot of time in the long run. And I think that's exciting, especially if we're looking at building out a podcast for business purposes. The last thing I want to do or see is an entrepreneur or an author or a coach who is spending 20 hours a week editing videos. That's really not going to be the best use of your time. You could outsource it. Yes, you could. There's a cost involved with that. But still, I think that the live approach is much, much more efficient.
I would agree with that. It makes me nervous thinking that something is live because it's like, well, what if it needs to be edited? What if I screw up? Or what if the guest screws up? But you're just saying, just let it go. It is what it is.
It rarely happens. I'm on your show right now. I've been on many, many podcasts that have been pre-recorded. And very rarely, if ever, is there a case where a conversation really has to be diced and sliced, so to speak. It doesn't happen very often. Something would have to be completely off the rails. There would have had to have been a technical major snafu for that to get to the point where it's like, this really needs to be chopped up into a million pieces. So I often say, just have a conversation with your guest, because that's really what it's all about. And keep the parts that you deem imperfect, keep them in, as opposed to thinking, oh, this has to be perfect. And a lot of people from the corporate world, I think, struggle with this idea of letting go of the perfection, because it's a very controlled environment. Everything is gone over with a fine-tooth comb. Everything is just, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And what people want today is they want to be a fly on the wall. They want to hear a conversation that sounds real, that sounds authentic, that sounds conversational, because that's where connection happens. And if they can feel that, and I hope that they're feeling that now, because, we're just having a conversation. If you can just have a conversation, now all of a sudden people feel like they're part of that conversation. And more often than not, I think people can hear and sense when something has been overly edited. And now they're kind of wondering, I wonder what was cut out and why.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to leave things as they are for the most part, unless, of course, there is some kind of snafu. Like I did have one guest who had to leave several times throughout the show because her dog was barking. And so we've got these big gaps that I obviously had to edit out and find a way to make sure that we linked up where she left off to where she was going to restart. But as I say, I've done over 300 episodes, and that was just one where that happened. So you're right. It very rarely happens.
And it does happen. And it could be a technical issue that came up where maybe the microphone, something happened, or somebody knocked the microphone and it made a really big sound, or somebody had an Amazon delivery at the door and the doorbell rang. Dogs are barking, kids are crying, other things that are happening. Sure, you might want to edit those things out, but I think it's fairly rare that that happens. On the editing side, if you're going to pre-produce and you're going to record your podcast and edit it, It's less likely that you're going to necessarily be cutting out portions of the interview, but where the editing starts to become cumbersome and time consuming is more so from the standpoint of adding elements to the actual interview. So the name banners, maybe slides or slates or titles, graphics, overlays, music, things of that nature that need to be added in the post production. I'm a big fan of doing it live because I'm adding those elements in real time. Therefore, I don't have to do that part. I'm also a big fan of systems and automation. This is a part of what comes into play for me because I bring in the best practices from the broadcasting industry. And you can imagine that when you're working for, a media company or conglomerate, they have usually, I wouldn't say skeletal crew, but, they try to keep the teams small and as productive as possible. And the reason that we can do that and create content 24/7 to deadline on a consistent basis, 7 days a week, is because we have systems. And so I bring a lot of that automation and systems into what I do and how I produce my own show so that I can be as efficient as possible.
And you make it sound so easy.
Well, it's easy once it's set up.
Of course. And that's always the case. It's like in the beginning. And I remember when I first started this, the first few interviews were dreadful, but I still went ahead with it because if I was waiting for perfection, it might never be that I did this podcast. So it was more important to get it going. And I learned over time. And now it's been, 6 years. And yeah, I feel much more natural, much more comfortable with this. And it's fun. I have much more fun with it. So
it's a blast. I've been listening lately to John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire. He has a new book and I've been listening to it. And he talks a lot about that in the beginning of the book, about how his first episodes, he admits, were terrible. And look at him now. So you do have to start somewhere. So I applaud you for that, for trudging through that difficult, challenging beginning section.
Absolutely.
But those who do pursue that and who persevere are the ones who will benefit in the long run.
Yeah, it's consistency. It's just doing it. And interestingly enough, John Lee Dumas was one of my early teachers in this. And I know that he did a podcast every single day. I don't know if he still does it, but it was like, oh my goodness, the thought of that. I mean, weekly, is already quite a bit, but every day that was just a little too much for me. Let's talk about monetizing a podcast or a video podcast, whether it's audio, video. What are your recommendations there? Because you mentioned that if we did decide to record the video, you've got the post-production, and that's going to, unless you do it yourself, somebody's got to do it. Talk to us about the idea of monetizing.
I will speak to this from the perspective of the live stream video podcast, since that is what I do and what I know best. Whether you are producing your show recorded or live, the fact is that, and as you know, you're 300 plus episodes in, I'm about 55 episodes into the newest incarnation of mine. But with any new podcast that you start, monetization in the traditional model is difficult to do when you don't have an audience. In the early stages of starting a show, you don't necessarily have a massive audience. John Lee Dumas didn't have a huge audience when he started. Neither do I, neither do you. No one has an audience in the beginning stages. So the question becomes, well, what is the point of it then? How can I monetize and how can I make money with this, since I'm doing it for business, from the beginning? And while, yes, you could do traditional things like get sponsors, you could get advertisers to support your show in the early stages, it's a harder sell because you can't prove what kind of audience you're bringing in at that point in time. It's not to say that you can't get a sponsorship or advertising or do it the traditional way, but it is a more uphill battle. My thinking around this is a little bit different. With my profitable video podcast, formula, I think we have to extend the definition of what profitability is in the early stages of a show. How much does it mean to you, or what is it worth to you as an entrepreneur, an author in this case, to be seen out in the public. What is that worth to you? What is brand awareness worth to you? How do we get brand awareness? Often it's through content that we're producing. What is that worth to you? It's worth a lot because people's attention is on their mobile devices, on their podcast app, online. And the other thing is that we've heard the adage that your network is, your net worth. When you're building a podcast in the early stages, you have guests, you have listeners, you have people who are commenting. There's an opportunity to expand your network and henceforth your net worth by virtue of relationships, by virtue of collaborations, joint ventures, affiliate relationships, maybe even building your network to the point where you have people that you can just dial up or call on for a little bit of advice in certain areas, depending what kind of show you're producing. So there's much, much value in that. And the third piece of the profitability for an early stage show that is not being traditionally monetized at this point, I believe, is from promoting your own products and services. There's nothing to say that you can't have your own podcast that is brought to you by Name Your Company, or that has sponsorships, the beginning, the middle, and end, that promote your own course, your own mastermind, your own program, your own membership. And those can be pre-produced and added into the production, including live. And so I think that the profitability question needs to be, and the monetization question needs to be thought of in a slightly different way for early stage. Now, here's the wonderful thing. If you really start to concentrate on building your network, building your brand awareness and your content, and promoting your own products and services, you're still being profitable in the early stages. But as you continue and you have a great system in place, my suggestion is live video stream podcast that's repurposed to an audio, is that you're building your audience as you're doing that. And guess what? In the long run, you will be able to monetize it traditionally through sponsorship, through advertising as the audience grows. So you are able to be profitable from the beginning.
I love looking at it differently because, yes, I was just thinking in terms of sponsorships, and I hate the advertising. I've been on those shows, and in the middle of the show, you've got, these ads. I didn't like it at all. But the idea of sponsorship, I think, is very tasteful. I've spoken to companies about the idea, but you're absolutely right. Here's a vehicle. Why not? Why not promote my coaching? Why not promote any of the services that I might offer? That's an incredible segue, by the way, for you to tell us about your services.
Well, I have a 4-step process that I teach to help people launch their live video podcast in 30 days. That's really what I'm doing and building. And so I have a gift that is the 9 tech tools that I use to manage and publish and put out my video podcast. And one of the tools I've mentioned on the show as being Restream, but there are some other tools that I use as well. That's really what I'm helping people to do now, is to really launch their own show, but do it in a way that isn't going to take 6 months. This is not about getting caught up in perfectionism and trying to build out all these things. It's about launching, but doing it in a strategic way, but getting it done. I am not a proponent or fan of perfectionism to the point where it's holding people back. We have to start taking action. And I have a 4-step methodology to conceptualize, to install technology, to do outreach, and then create. And that 4-step framework has been successful for those who have taught this process to so far.
Fantastic. I know that I'm going to put the link to that great gift. So thank you for that in the show notes. And how about your website? What's the best one for people to link to you on?
My website is SherylPlouffe.com. That is always there, of course. And there's an option to get free gifts and have a consultation if you so choose to, and things of that nature. But I would also say, find me on social media at Sheryl Plouffe. The advantage of having a French Canadian name like Plouffe allowed me to have Sheryl Plouffe available when it was time to claim all of those monikers. So at Sheryl Plouffe on all social media platforms, you can reach out to me and send me a DM or send me a message. And I'd be happy to send you resources to help you on your path toward launching your own video podcast.
And that's very generous of you. Appreciate that. One of the things that we haven't talked about, and I'd love you to just give us maybe one big one, and that is a mistake that you see people make. You should have brought that in maybe before we started talking about that. But hey, let's talk about at least one big mistake people should avoid.
I think one big mistake is not having a good structure for the actual interview. What happens a lot is that people will start a show, but then they don't have the right balance of themselves in the show while also giving the guest the opportunity to share the topic and elaborate on the topic that they're talking about. So, for example, you might see a show where it begins and it's all about the host. It's just me, and look what I'm doing. And it's this long, or another mistake is just not having the right structure. It's just not starting it off to hook people into wanting to listen to the show. People don't have very long attention spans. That is a big mistake. It's how do you hook people in? So hooking people into the subject at hand, and then you have a higher likelihood of keeping them there if it's interesting, if the conversation is leading somewhere. But people want to know early stage into your show whether or not this is for them and if they should stick around.
Super. Well, I hope listeners, you stuck around long enough to hear the whole broadcast, because Sheryl has shared some incredible words of wisdom. And is there one golden nugget that you would leave us with?
Anyone can host a show. Anyone who can have a conversation and can hold a conversation can have their own show, can launch a talk show, interview, podcast, and do it on video, because it isn't about perfection. It's about getting out there and providing value to your audience. And that's really what your audience is hoping for, waiting for, and craving for.
Yeah. Solutions. That's what we're all about. We're solution doctors. I love it. Sheryl, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And thank you all for taking time out of your precious day to listen to this interview. And I sincerely hope that it sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.
The time is now to take action and finally build your book-selling empire. And the great news is that Susan is here to help you. Visit bookmarketingmentors.com and sign up for a free 15-minute book marketing strategy session with Susan. She'll help you discover your first steps to marketing and selling your book. Only those who take action are rewarded, so visit bookmarketingmentors.com, and we'll see you again next week.